You're listening to a Mamamia podcast.
Mamamia acknowledges the traditional owners of land and waters that this podcast is recorded on. Hello and welcome to Mamamia Out Loud, what women are actually talking about on Monday, the 29th of April. I'm Holly Wainwright.
I'm Mia Freedman.
And I'm Jessie Stevens.
And on the show today, more than 100,000 people marched against male violence this weekend. And today, one of them, who just so happens to be our Prime Minister, is being called a liar. So, what happened at the Canberra March? Also, Harry and Meghan have hired a new spin doctor and given him one big job: make everyone like us again. So, what's his first move? And has the announcement of a big book this weekend shown that we're not as evolved as we think we are when it comes to mental health conversations? But first, Jessie.
In case you missed it, daily showers are performative and they have no real health benefit.
Really?
Yeah. So a new UK study has found that we're all showering too much.
Of course it's come out of the UK. Sorry, Hal.
That's true.
Well, apparently people in the UK shower 1 to 2 times a day, which is more than Americans.
How often do you shower?
Twice a day.
I shower twice a day. Hal?
Once a day.
Morning or evening?
Morning, always.
Okay, I have thoughts on that.
Yeah.
Apparently, showering too much is actually stripping away the skin's microbiome, which is compromising the overall health of our body. It is common for people in the UK to shower once or twice a day, and an author of the study says that change has come about largely by accident. In the mid-20th century, it became commonplace to have showers in the home for the first time. And so just because of the ease, showering a lot became a normal thing to do. People became afraid of smelling bad, but it was never a health thing. Health people never said you need to be showering once a day.
What do you mean health? Like,
as in like germs, like a germ thing. Like if you think that it's a hygiene thing for you to have a shower every day, experts are saying this is not a hygiene thing. They don't have a consensus necessarily on how often we should shower, but one chemist named David Whitlock was so intent on preserving his skin barrier that he didn't shower for 12 years. Instead, he sprayed himself with a good bacteria that neutralised the body's bad smells.
You know, in the olden days,
We shall
when
live
you
with
watch
him.
those costume dramas of like Queen Elizabeth's court and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
They would get laced into their corsets at the beginning of winter and not take them off again until winter was
Bullshit.
finished.
Bullshit.
And that's why perfume kind of became invented in those days, because the rich, fancy people just put loads of perfume on to disguise how badly they smell. So anytime you watch any of those, just imagine what they all smelled like.
that's very lazy girl.
That is so lazy, girl,
Yeah.
to just put – and the thing is, a perfume over a bad smell, we all know,
It's just
does jack shit. It actually makes it worse.
Yeah.
So it's performative
Yeah.
to clean yourself.
And it's performative because we have this phobia of smelling like we haven't showered.
So if you exercise, or if it's summer, if you sweat, if you go to the toilet, if you have your period, you surely need some form of water.
Excrete
Okay,
things.
well, one expert, an environmentalist, because the environmentalists love this study, because they've got a good point. It's not good for the environment. But they say they wet a rag in the sink and they do a little sink.
It's a pommy
Pits.
wash.
Yes.
So when I was a kid, the cliche is, which is what Mia was alluding to before, the cliche used to be that English people didn't wash. And maybe it has something to do with those Elizabethans we were just talking about. It is true that when I was a kid, we had a bath once a week. Bath night.
Wow.
It was important. Bath night. Mum would come in the street and she'd be like, it's bath night. Never all the kids had to go inside. But in between, every day you had what I learned to be called a pommy wash, which is exactly that. You wet a flannel, pits down there.
Pits and bits.
Yeah.
Pits and bits,
I've got a
please.
friend who doesn't shower.
Does she pits and bits it?
I don't know, but it was a bit of a theme at her 50th birthday party in a lot of the speeches. And one time she was in hotel quarantine. She was quarantining with someone else in an adjacent hotel room, and they were provided with towels, like bath towels. And the bath towel at the end of the 2 weeks was in the same place as it was at the beginning, unused.
Nah.
But showers just make you feel good.
I think it's a habit more than anything at bookends a day. I like washing the day off. The day
Yeah.
feels dirty, it feels sticky, and I feel like before
Washing the day on and washing the day off.
Yeah, before I get into bed, I like to know I'm going to bed clean.
Yes.
No, it wakes me up. No good. Can't shower at night. Showers wake me up. So if I had a shower, I'd be awake. I want to be asleep.
All right.
Out Louders, how often do you shower? Are you performative about it? Do you make people watch? Do you tell them? Do you tell everybody what you're doing in there?
We need to have significant change when a woman dies at the hands of a partner or someone they know every 4 days on average in Australia, then that is a national crisis.
About 100,000 people marched across Australia this weekend to raise their voices that enough is enough when it comes to male violence in Australia. As we spoke about last Wednesday on Out Loud, we've lost 32 women at the hands of violent men this year. Over the weekend, it seems we lost another, a young mother of 4 in Western Australia. Women are furious and women are mobilising. And, as we also discussed last week, we're asking men to come with us. The organisers of this weekend's marches were an organisation called What Were You Wearing? They're a non-profit that supports survivors of sexual assault. And they made it clear in all their socials that men were welcome at these marches. One post they put out ahead of time said, "Your presence is critical. We want and need you to stand in solidarity alongside us." And one man who committed to march was the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese. You might remember that our last Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, got a lot of grief for not coming out of Parliament House to meet the women's marches during his era.
I think he also said they were lucky to march because in other countries they'd been met with bullets.
He did, and one imagines that Albo was trying to avoid such a moment. And today, many of the headlines are about him, because when he stood up to speak at the Canberra rally, this is what he said.
Be clear, we did ask to speak, myself and Katie, and were told that that wasn't possible, and that's fine. I respect the organisers' right to do that.
That's a full-out lie.
To do that. We're here today to demand that governments of all levels must do better, including my own, including every state and territory government.
Now, what you can hear there is Sarah Williams, who is one of the key organisers of the march. She was standing next to Albo while he was speaking. And when he said himself and Katie, he is referring to Katie Gallagher, the Minister for Women. And he marched with Katie and with several other female ministers. Now, the woman saying that's a lie, that's a full-out lie, was Williams. As he continued to speak after she said that, she started to cry, and several people rushed up to the stage to comfort her. The crowd, it's pretty fair to say, were not very impressed with Albo. I don't think they were very impressed with him before he started talking, to be honest. After the event, Williams released a statement, and part of what she said in there is that the Prime Minister of Australia lied to his country today. Representatives from Gallagher and Albanese's office both said this morning that they were sure Katie would be happy to speak, not the Prime Minister. Albanese's office made it clear he was just walking and was not interested in speaking. She went on to say she thought that he then demanded to speak because he was being heckled, and that he demonstrated what entitlement looks like when he diminished her in front of a crowd. Today, Albanese has been replying to these allegations on several morning shows, discussing his decision to convene a National Cabinet meeting on Wednesday to address violence. In case you've deliberately forgotten, National Cabinet was invented during COVID, and it's special meetings where you get all the leaders of all the states and territories together to talk about something specific. It usually denotes something really important that needs action, and that's what he wants to talk about. But several morning hosts asked him if he was a liar, as Sarah Williams had stated, and he basically sidestepped it.
You were called a liar. How does that sit with you?
I'm focused on the issue, Carl. It was an emotional day for people, and I get that. What is an emotional issue? Because women were saying yesterday, enough is enough.
So,
it's a mess.
it is. Was this an unfortunate misstep?
It's also a distraction.
Yes, by a well-intentioned man. Or was it, as the organisers are suggesting, an example of male arrogance, which is part of the problem?
I think it's a misunderstanding and a misstep, and doesn't sound good. I have so much respect for this organiser and what she has done. And also as a victim herself, I think that these events must be very, very confronting. But I don't think it was necessarily about a man with power trying to diminish a vulnerable young woman. It may have looked like that. The spectacle of it might have looked like that. I think there was a misunderstanding, and I think that Anthony Albanese was trying to do the right thing. I read what the demands were for the protest, and it clearly stated the number one demand for the protest said, government acknowledgement that this is a national emergency and take immediate action. That is what Anthony Albanese appeared to want to do. By standing there and saying, we take this seriously, he was trying to appease the protesters, but I want to give him more credit than that, because even though we are in a moment of crisis, his government has done some really good stuff, and I hope that this crisis meeting means that they will do more and more good stuff. At the Sydney rally, Chris Minns was called out because he was there for a little bit and then he left.
He's the Premier of New South Wales.
Yes, and he's the Premier of New South Wales. And I just
it emerged
think
today that his father had a massive heart attack and was taken to hospital.
Yeah. So I do think that it's a distraction. I think that it can feel like there is so much justifiable anger, and sometimes that anger can attach itself to not quite the thing that we're angry at. I've seen the word misogyny thrown around a lot. I don't think that either of those things are even nearly an example of misogyny.
Absolutely not.
But I also understand the general sense of anger.
Mia, is it impossible for an Albo to get this right? Because we discussed the reaction to Scott Morrison refusing to talk to protesters, talking to a crowd who's already quite primed to be mad with you because they feel like you're not doing enough. Was there a way in which he nailed this, which he certainly didn't do? But what do you think?
To be honest, I think there's no way for any man to get it right at the moment. But by God, I'm glad they're trying. And I don't want them to stop trying. When you are the leader of the country or you are in any position of power, you are always going to be caught between needing to be a leader and speaking on behalf of the country or the state or whatever organisation or body that you represent, but also not wanting to make yourself the centre of the story, and also by you saying something, everyone's going to push against you because you're the status quo, the embodiment of the status quo, which has so far failed women because 32 of us have been murdered so far this year, maybe 33. And so the alternative is that he could have gone and not spoken. That would have been criticised. And I'm not here to defend him or anyone. I'm just saying that I think you're right about women are furious at the moment, and our anger is attaching itself to things in ways that aren't necessarily fair, if fair is even the right word, or proportionate. I've spoken to people who are like, I'm not going to the Women's March because I keep bloody marching, and why aren't the men marching? Well, there were two men who did march, two men who did show up. I'm not blaming anyone who's critical of them, and I'm also not blaming them for what they did.
Don't you think, though, because we spoke on Wednesday about wanting men to join this conversation, and that is certainly building in a groundswell that I haven't really seen before, this thing of like, come and talk, come and talk. But
I'm not seeing that among men.
No, from women to men.
Oh, yeah.
So what I'm saying in the groundswell that I haven't seen before is this sort of, we need you to step up for us, come and talk. But
I genuinely don't think they know what to do or what to say.
And then,
I think
so this is the thing, is that I wonder that I want men to talk to men about fixing this problem. But probably what Albo should have done when he came to that march on the weekend is walk and listen and not speak. Because by coming up to the stage that had until that point been populated by women, many of whom were survivors themselves, he was, as you just sort of said, Mia, and I know that he may not have intended to, but sort of inserting himself into this conversation, which is what he's been asked to do. But what maybe would be more helpful and important at this point is walk, show your support, have some male ministers with you. Don't just walk with the women, but bring some blokes.
Nice. Where was Barnaby?
Bring as many blokes as you can rustle up on a Sunday in Canberra, and don't talk, just listen. And I know that there would have been criticism for that too, but it's probably at this point a better idea, because then he gets to convene a national cabinet on Wednesday, you know?
Nah. With protests, the social movements that get the most momentum are the ones that have clear directives and clear points that they want to achieve, as in, we want the government to do blah. And this is what was actually great about this, is that it's one thing to say enough is enough, and we've been talking about conversations aren't enough, and a lot of experts have come in with exactly, there was a great article in The Guardian by Jess Hill, here are exactly the things you need to do, this is what we want experts to be doing that. But when a protest comes out and says this is about our government knowing that enough has been enough, and as I said, the government acknowledging that this is a national emergency, I don't think you can then have the government, even the idea that Anthony Albanese would insert himself, he's the Prime Minister, he's acknowledging this is my responsibility, I'm a leader, and I'm going to stand here and hear you
But it was so high risk for him to do it.
Yeah.
But, you know, even with my PR hat on, I'm like, even though I'm sure, you know, giving Albo all the benefit of the doubt, he didn't want to make that woman cry. He didn't want to do all those things. But the problem was the cameras were on him and his reaction was not great.
No,
like,
I
his
agree.
facial expressions were not great. His body language was not great. And it's made it worse for him. And I just think that's a very high degree of difficulty. And as Mia's already said, a distraction from what we all want, and I'm sure what he wants too, which is for this crisis to have some direction towards resolution. But he made it worse. He should have stayed off the stage.
If you need a bit of distraction in your news cycle, the Royals are having a jam war. It's a lot like West Side Story, but with expensive condiments.
Do you guys eat jam?
Oh, I love jam. I don't eat it very often. I eat it on scones, though, when I do Brent's award-winning scones.
I've never wanted to eat jam more than after researching this segment.
It's been a real resurgence, a real push for jam back into the zeitgeist, which I respect. I'm not a jam eater.
I quite like jam in a donut. Related, Meghan and Harry have appointed a new publicist, Tahli, as you mentioned earlier. There's a lot of talk about that, but first to jam. Remember a few weeks ago when Meghan Markle announced that she was starting a new business called American Riviera Orchard?
I go to look at their Instagram all the time.
Yeah.
And you know I live and breathe this stuff. I can never remember what to type into my search.
It's a lot of words.
It's a terrible
It's a
name
lot of
for that
nouns.
reason. The recall is not sharp.
Yeah, it's not catchy. Meghan said that American Riviera Orchard, when she announced it a few weeks ago, it would be selling kitcheny treats like jams and jellies. And side note, what is a jelly? Can anyone tell me
I think
what
it's
a jelly
American
is?
jam. I think jelly is, you know, they say
Like
peanut butter and jelly sandwich. They mean a peanut butter and jam sandwich.
Do they?
Is that what jelly means? I thought it might. You know how sometimes there's a cheese plate and there's something and you don't know what it
That's
is?
also a jelly.
Isn't that quince paste?
Can be. Could also be quince jelly. Anyway.
Well, last
Yet
week...
again, we're displaying our domestic goddess credentials.
So true. 50 lucky influencers in America received a basket of lemons from Meghan, and nestled among the lemons was a first-run limited edition jar of strawberry jam. Chrissy Teigen, Kris Jenner and Mindy Kaling were just some of the chosen ones, and they all posted excitedly about the jam on their socials.
Cynical people would
Because
suggest that
yay-
none of those people eat jam.
Jam. Enter Buckingham Palace. A few days later, the official Buckingham Palace shop Instagram, of which I was unaware until today, that account posted about their own line of royal jam, which they call a luxury jam, and you can buy it for around $10 a jar, not including shipping. So I'm looking at blank
Do
faces.
I want Meghan jam or do I want Buckingham Palace jam?
Well, apparently I read that Buckingham Palace jam has really seen a spike because
Well, you can
jam-
buy it and you can't buy the other one yet. You can't buy Meghan jam
Yeah,
yet.
I know, but I just think I would love, you know, Woolworths, if you're listening, have we seen a spike?
In jam.
Yeah, because
Well-
it's just like I've not really thought so much about jam as I have lately.
Not since the dance-off that Britney Spears and Justin Timberlake had on a nightclub dance floor after their breakup have two warring parties found such a creative way to have public biff. And I have to say I'm here for it. Although if you really want to impress us, make your own version of Vegemite, Royals.
Oh, so true.
But it's the new publicist that
Yes.
they've hired. Interestingly,
I need to
he
talk
is
about the jam first.
UK-based.
Wait, before you
okay.
get to the publicist, I need to talk about the jam. Okay, I have some questions. Firstly, so we send out 50 jars of jam.
They're all numbered, by the way.
They're all numbered. Do you think in lists of how much she thinks you're important?
Definitely.
Okay.
So I
number
also,
one's Oprah Winfrey.
Yeah, Oprah would have got number one jam. So far, she hasn't posted. I've been keeping an eye.
Okay, this is what I want to say.
Chrissy Teigen posted and how she made this really weird sandwich where she put that and jam and then cheese and then bacon and then she fried the whole thing.
Just showed you that Americans do not know what to do with jam.
That's so true.
Put it on a crumpet.
So Oprah hasn't posted. Serena Williams, she definitely got jam. She hasn't posted. Cameron Diaz, I reckon she got some, and I think Gwyneth got some.
Gloria Steinem. Mia and I know Meghan's friend list very well.
Intimately.
And so she hasn't posted about the jam either.
No.
Among inspirational quotes and
She hasn't.
changing the world for women. Okay, this is my question. So someone from Suits, can't remember her name, she got a jam. She posted like a carousel of pictures rolling around on the grass with her jam. And she's like, it's amazing.
What, like in the jam? Like
she's holding the jam, but she's like rolling around.
with it still in
with
its jar.
Yeah, with it
Okay.
in its jar, just being like, M's jam is just great. Do you think she was paid?
No, none of them were paid.
No.
They were
Okay,
just
so they're
not
not
paid.
sponsored posts.
No, they're trying to just get in
Hashtag
the good
gifted.
books.
Anyway,
But
can we
talk
get
about
back
the
to the spin
publicist?
doctor? Because I have
Yeah.
many things to tell you about this.
His name's Charlie Gibson, and interestingly, they've already got a US publicity team, but he's going to be dealing with all media inquiries from the UK and Europe, and he's based in the UK. Why is this interesting?
They are laying the groundwork for a return. I don't mean a literal return as in they're moving back there. They're not doing that, I don't think. You've just launched a brand called American Riviera Orchard for a start, and Harry's just got his residency. So they're not going to move back there. But the UK is an exceptionally hostile market for Meghan and Harry, right? Their approval ratings there are tiny. Everybody's very invested in the War of the Brothers and everything.
Why do they need them though? Can't they just chop the UK off?
Well, the problem is, you see, there's an opportunity there, a growing opportunity, because as we know, things ain't great in the palace at the moment. Now, one of the reasons why press representatives have never been more important for royals and slightly sort of royals. What should we call them? The Aldi royals. They're like royal-ish. Like
the off-Broadway royals.
Yeah. Is that they are really bad at PR. We may have noticed that in this thing that we do not speak of anymore, which was the great Where's Kate debate. It was clear that that was handled terribly by the highly paid experts at the palace. And then just last week, we were all in a mad flurry on Friday. Hopefully most of you Outlouders were all off living your lives. But in the media, we got wind that at 3 a.m. Australian time, there was going to be a big press conference from the palace. Now, as it turned out, it was an announcement that the king
Noted.
and queen are coming back to work. And their first engagement is going to be visiting a
Opening
cancer
a jam
statement.
factory.
That would have been great. Visiting a
That's
cancer
good news. I'm
centre.
glad King Charles
It's
is
really
doing
good
well.
news and
Yeah.
also a very classy way to do it. The first thing they're doing is related to cancer. It's
Yeah.
related to this
They
centre.
released a new photo.
They're going to thank, all the people who've helped, and they're going to shine a light on cancer services in the UK. This is exactly what royals should be doing.
Yeah.
This is very good royal business.
And he's logging onto Instagram to boost that ad about the
is.
Buckingham Palace jam.
Well, perhaps, yes. In fact, maybe they'll just swap some URLs around and, before you know it. Anyway, the thing is that this is exactly what should be happening. But in the gap in between the media getting wind of that and the 3 a.m. press conference, obituaries were written.
Oh, yeah.
That's standard media practice anyway, of course, to have an obituary ready to go.
Every
But
media
obituaries were-
organisation
everyone was planning their
staffed up
stories.
for the weekend, yeah.
People were called
Including
off
us.
leave. Like, it was all happening. This is yet again another example of how bad they are at messaging, right? And I reckon Harry and Meg's are seeing that there's going to be a bit of a void needed for people to go and visit centres and raise awareness for important things and all that. In the UK, also need that market to be softened up for the jam and for whatever products follow it, and for Harry's next book and Meghan's book and whatever happens. And so they need to step into that void. Now, the guy they've hired is interesting because he's got a lot of experience, a lot of which with commercial brands like dog food and
Yeah, like Domino's Pizza. So in consumer items. So that's why it's interesting. I mean, that's what she's moving into, is selling products,
Selling
e-commerce
stuff.
essentially.
And big brands too, like Instagram, Samsung. He's worked for all these people. And their UK team was all fired when they left for the US. And so the fact they're rebuilding it is interesting.
A lot of people have left. But what's interesting, Jessie, you made the point, why can't they just cut off the UK and Europe? If you're an e-commerce retailer, you can't afford to cut off a market as big as the UK and Europe because that's huge.
And this suggests that they are really pivoting to product, right? That obviously we've seen the Netflix deal.
It
and
doesn't matter what
only-
it doesn't matter what you're pivoting to, because even if it's Netflix or Spotify, everything's global now. If you have a brand, it has to be able to live globally. And I read on the weekend an analysis by a whole lot of very experienced spin doctors about what they would do if they had been hired like this guy to help rehabilitate Meghan's brand image in the UK. And they identified something that I think is at the heart of where this problem lies and why it's quite gritty, is that the way that you market in the UK and in Australia, essentially, self-deprecation, humour, don't take yourself too seriously. But the way you market in the US is to take yourself very seriously. And that's what they like because it's a lot more earnest, it's less humorous, it's not self-deprecating. They don't understand piss-taking in the US. No. And if you go there, everyone from actors to brands have discovered this. If you go there and you use your typically self-deprecating Aussie humour that works very well in places like Canada and the UK, doesn't resonate in the US.
Well, Rebel Wilson said that in her Dak Shepard interview. She said that was the number one piece of advice she got, that if you're going to go to the US, then you've got to back yourself and sit there and go, I'm the female Jonah Hill. You can't kind of couch your skills in...
And it's interesting because even with Harry, when he first went to the US, in Britain, he is a bit knockabout. And he's like, I'm one of the lads and I'm having a beer and we're having a laugh and he will make these funny videos with the Queen and stuff back in the day. And remember, he went on James Corden and he did all those things. But I don't think the American market get that. It's like if you're royal and you want to sell us royal stuff, then you have to be fancy. But I also just think they don't want to squander the UK, like enormous possibilities of that.
The other thing that came up that is confusing about what they're doing, like they're going on this tour of Nigeria, which I don't understand. It's not like we say, you know what we're going to do? We're going to go on a tour of Nigeria.
Well, isn't it a good thing? Isn't it a humanitarian? They want to make the world a better place?
Yes, sorry, that is true. Yeah. And I'm being cynical here. But all the sort of spin doctors said, what does their brand stand for? They do a lot of talking about what they want to do, but they haven't actually done it.
Maybe that's why they're going to Nigeria.
So this week you're going to be seeing Harry and Megs around a lot. You were softened up a bit last week if you've got your eye on the celebrity sites because they went to a polo match in the US and there was lots of public kissing.
The Invictus Games coming up.
So this week, Harry is returning to Britain for the first time since he made that dash to see his dad when his dad first announced his sickness, which, if you believe the stories, was a quick 20-minute, very polite meet and greet, and then he flew out again for an Invictus Games event. And then he and Meghan are going to Nigeria, also something to do with the Invictus Games, but also they know they've got a good connection in that part of the world and they're going to go and raise awareness of this and that. Now, that is a very royal thing to do.
Yeah,
it is.
So I think they're trying to walk this line of being sort of royal. As I say, that a vacuum is opening there for the young royals, and I think they want to step into that. The thing will be interesting is that since obviously the excesses of the Kate mania and the media have really backed off the royals, rightly so, to be very respectful to Kate, how will they handle it when Harry comes in this week? Because interestingly, he's changed his strategy a little bit. He has been suing every major UK newspaper. He's dropped some of those cases. He was also suing London police for not paying for his protection. He's also dropped that case. So it seems like he's kind of softening.
They're looking for
the ground on Britain a little bit. And I'm sure that he would probably love it if he can pop round to Will's and Kate's for tea and have someone take a picture of that. But unlikely to happen. But maybe our man, Mr. Gibson, can solve that.
If you are a Mamamia subscriber, did you know that you are already in the running for winning a bunch of prizes? Claire and I identified that there's a bit of an unjust lazy girl tax. We get lots of things such as parking fines. We forget to pick things up from the post office. It's a really stressful existence. So we had an idea, and that is lazy girl giveaways, and that is for our Mamamia subscribers. Our next prize is so good. As of right now, if you are a Mamamia subscriber, you could win our Lana Maria jewellery bundle. The bundle includes the Harlow necklace. It is gold-filled and worth $209. The Eves bracelet, also gold-filled, and it's worth $119. But wait for it. You also get a $1,000 voucher for you to splurge on yourself and still have enough to have your friend's birthday present sorted for the rest of the year. If you aren't already a subscriber and you want to enter this giveaway and all the giveaways going forward, you can subscribe via the link in our show notes. This week, a book by former Prime Minister Scott Morrison called Plans for Your Good, a Prime Minister's Testimony of God's Faithfulness, will be published in Australia. It is described as less political memoir and more pastoral encouragement. And Morrison's aim in this book is to encourage others to discover how they can access and see the many blessings of God in their own lives. This is very unusual for a Prime Minister. This is not the type of book they normally write when they are no longer in office. Now, last week, Morrison was interviewed by The Australian, and he revealed that while in office, he sought treatment for debilitating and agonising anxiety. He said that without medication, he would have fallen into a serious depression. He talked about the combination of physical exhaustion with the unrelenting and callous brutality of politics and media attacks. He described it as, you dread the future and you can't get out of bed. It can shut you down mentally and physically. It robs you of your joy and can damage relationships. I know this from personal experience. At the end of last week, Neil Mitchell wrote an article for The Age with the headline, "A contact called me with news about the PM. It left me with a moral dilemma." This article was fascinating. He explained that in October 2021, he was told by a source that Morrison was experiencing significant mental health problems and was in a bad way. Mitchell writes that while mental health is a private issue, whether a leader is fit to lead is in the national interest. He interviewed Morrison publicly on radio, but then he also spoke to him off the record and asked him directly, are you struggling with your mental health? We could talk about it sensitively. I've heard this from a source. Mitchell, I believe rightly, chose not to publish what he knew at the time. But he asks, was that in Australia's interest? Do voters have a right to know the mental and physical health of their Prime Minister? And can we expect a person in such a situation to make a decision on their own ability to function? Mia, what do you reckon?
I thought this was such an interesting story. I am about to name drop, but I've interviewed on No Filter 3 former Prime Ministers, and I've asked all of them pretty directly if they've seen a therapist when they spoke about what they went through, mostly around leadership changes. So that was Julia Gillard, Kevin Rudd and Malcolm Turnbull.
And 2 of the 3 were currently Prime Minister when you spoke to them? Were they all Prime Minister?
I didn't know. I asked each of them that question afterwards because after they'd left the job, they spoke about what it was like, the difficulties that they experienced in a way that was obviously more candid than, you know, they've all got game face on, as you would expect when they're in the job. And interestingly, Julia Gillard is now the head or the chair of Beyond Blue, which is a mental health organisation. That's one of the things she does. But Malcolm Turnbull and Kevin Rudd's answers were similar and shocked me in that they both said they talked about mental health issues at the time, but they said if they'd have gone to see a therapist, their political enemies would have weaponised it. There would have been paparazzi shots. They would have been made to be not equipped to be leading the country. Just a couple of quotes that Scott Morrison also gave in his book. He said, I have no doubt that the halls of Parliament are filled with people going through enormous mental anguish on a daily basis. And that's not just the stuff they're dealing with in their professional life, but the impact that has being away from their family and all of this. It's not a complaint, it's just true. And I think we've got to sort of be transparent about that. Sharing my story is intended to encourage others and normalise and destigmatise what is very common for many Australians who deal with it every day. 2 things that he said were interesting. The first is that he was still able to function and get through it. So you can experience depression or anxiety and be high functioning. Not everybody is, and not everybody is all the time when they're experiencing it, but it is possible. So just because you're experiencing depression or anxiety doesn't necessarily mean that you're not able to continue with your job. And then he also tried to say, my faith family and the help I reached out for enabled me to get on with the job. And he sort of says God really helped me, but also medication helped him. And I think it's important to note that the family wasn't enough, God wasn't enough. He needed medical intervention. And I know that when I experienced crippling anxiety and had a bit of a breakdown and got diagnosed, I didn't want to write about it at the time because I was building a business. I was worried that to my staff, I would seem like I was not capable, and to the industry when I was trying to build a business with my husband, that it would be seen that I was flaky.
Is that stigma?
So I didn't write about it for years afterwards.
Is that stigma and discrimination? Because I'm wondering if it would have been weaponised and it would have been politically damaging for him to talk about it.
He would have had to step down.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any question about it. I think that if he'd have confirmed the rumours that Neil Mitchell, and let's face it, Neil Mitchell wouldn't have been the only one, had been handed about his mental health, he would have had to step down, because I just don't think we're evolved enough for that. And I think many people who, particularly anyone who's watched Nemesis on the ABC, will chortle a little at the idea of him having a little, I was going to say something dismissive. I was going to say having a little whinge about the callous brutality of politics when he is known to be one of the hard men. And he has been involved in leadership stoushes and bullying of MPs and lots of things. And he was very, very, even in that documentary, he's very hard line. So The thing is you've got a lot of people who are looking for the cracks, which is exactly what Rod said to you and Turnbull said to you, Mia. And once those cracks are apparent, you're marked and you're going down. And I don't think it's right necessarily that he would have had to step down, but I think unquestionably he would have to step down.
And is that a form of discrimination? This is what I'm
it's interesting.
grappling with.
No, because I think sometimes your mental health means that you aren't capable of doing what you need to do.
Sometimes, but not always. In the same way,
Sometimes,
there
but
are
not
a
always.
lot of people who have chronic illnesses that they live with that might impact how they do their work, that might not.
But Jessie, what would we have done with that information? Had he said, I'm struggling, I'm having panic attacks, I'm on medication now, I'm going through a difficult time. What as a society are we meant to do with that information, whether it's the Prime Minister or your boss at work or indeed your employee? What are you meant to do with that information?
I think it depends on why they tell you, right? Like, I understand and actually completely respect Scott Morrison's decision. I really respect Neil Mitchell for not revealing it when Scott Morrison didn't want that to come out and he denied it to him. But I think what we're not meant to do is then shout at them about what they are and are not capable of. Because for a lot of people, mental health issues do not incapacitate them and do not mean they can't do their job. Winston Churchill famously was a leader and some would say a very good leader, and he lived with depression.
Don't we have the right to privacy?
I think so. And also when you look at Scott Morrison, so he would have been early 50s when this happened. The highest rate of suicide in our society is men between the ages of about 45 and 49. He is very close to that. He is a demographic that we ought to be worried about. And there are a lot of men, I was reading this and thinking, how many men in Australia that fit that demographic almost perfectly are in positions of power and feel that they cannot say anything because of what they might lose, whether they might lose their job as the boss or anything within their family, whether it's perceived or whether it's real.
I agree with everything you've said there, Jessie, about him being representative of a demographic who is really struggling with this issue. But the problem is of saying all this after the fact is that towards the end of Scott Morrison's leadership, his leadership was being called into question all the time.
And he behaved erratically.
Remember when he went on holiday during the bushfires? Now, if you put this into context with that, you might think the man really needed a holiday.
I also think this was around the time he took everybody else's job secretly.
Yes.
He
So
appointed himself the minister.
He did a lot of erratic things.
Yeah.
But at the time, he would not show even a crack of weakness or anything that looked anything other than absolute resolve and conviction in what he was doing. I don't hold a hose, mate. You know, it was absolutely right for him to take everybody's jobs because he knew better than they did. And now after the fact, we know that he really was struggling, and all power to him. But at the same time, this is a prime ministership. This is a very, very important job, leading us through one of the most difficult and scary and risky times that we've ever been through, if you combine COVID with environmental catastrophe that was the bushfires. Never showing a minute's weakness. He was very much in the mold of an alpha male. Talk about his faith. Yes, we will absolutely talk about his faith, but he certainly was no advocate for mental health. He certainly didn't have an enormous amount of empathy for other groups who were struggling, outwardly at least. So it's kind of hard to rewrite history in a way that goes, if we'd have known that he was dealing with all that, we should have been sympathetic and supportive.
I don't think that's necessarily the case. What I'm saying is that if you have someone in, whether it's a position of leadership or if someone is paid to do a job and they're currently not able to do that job, they're behaving erratically.
What about they can do it but maybe not all that well?
Well, in that case, let's talk about him not doing the job that well. I don't think it's relevant what his discussions are with a therapist or a GP. Like, I don't think whether or not he's on medication was relevant to the Australian public.
I mean, I would have thought that being Prime Minister should come with its own therapist. And I'm not even joking.
I agree.
Yeah.
You've got to talk to someone, and in that role you can't trust many people. And of course you would have some very unique challenges in front of you in terms of how you were feeling and how you lived your life. And I just don't know. I don't understand how anyone could do it. But in terms of what's in the public interest, what's the right to privacy, I don't know if that's reconciled, because the other thing that we like and need as a people is strong leaders that feel bulletproof. Like, remember during COVID, everyone was like, Josh Frydenberg's my daddy kind of vibes. It was like, I want someone to tell me that it's going to be okay.
But are you not a strong leader who's bulletproof if you're struggling with your mental health?
Also, nobody is bulletproof. Leaders are humans. And if we don't, so I'm kind of arguing against myself in that I think, I actually advocate for leaders showing us their human side. My issue is that Scott Morrison never did that. And that I agree with you, Mia, that I think every prime ministership should come with maybe a team of therapists. But because for them to do a really good job, they need to be in a good place. And I don't mind what that takes. I don't mind if that does take the occasional long weekend with your family and whatever, and all of those things. We do expect leaders to be bulletproof and we expect them to be exceptional.
I don't think we want them to be human.
But in terms of stigma, I think that Australia is in a place where we would, when I say we, I mean like broadly, culturally, pub testy kind of thing, accept absolutely a prime minister going to see a therapist. I don't think we'd have a problem with that. If you were like, Albo has an hour a week. I mean, I'm not saying that he does, but like imagine Albo has an hour a week where he goes and talks to his therapist. I don't think anyone would be bothered about that. But are we still at a place where it was like, and they are actively suffering from anxiety, depression, taking medication? I don't know if we're evolved enough to get our heads around that.
And I think that is stigmatising. And I think that explains why there are a lot of Australians who would not want to disclose to an employer or, a company that they are medicated or that they have a diagnosis because they think it makes them look flaky.
You don't want it to be weaponised. And also, when you're going through it, you don't have a lot of clarity around it. Often. I guess that's why you need people around you to say, hey, mate. And that's why people were so outraged when they discovered all these things that he was doing behind the scenes.
And quite a few of his former colleagues have said when they've been asked about this since the revelations, that explains a lot. Which again is stigmatising in a way, because now the narrative around Morrison is that he was unstable and doing wild things and, this is why. But as you kind of said, Jessie, it might well not be why.
No, it could be despite instead of because of mental illness.
If you're struggling with any of these topics that we've talked about, we'll put some links in the show notes to places to get help. If you've ever wanted to know what Jessie's marriage is like, I don't know what to say. I can't tell you what Jessie's marriage is like because I actually am very curious about
you
your
are
marriage.
Up close to that marriage all the time. You just went on holiday with that marriage. You're part of that marriage.
Oh, don't say that. That's Jessie's worst nightmare. Well, last week we did an episode where Jessie shared all the things she's learned in her first year of marriage, and I learned a lot from that episode too. Here's a little sneak peek.
And this was actually in Luca's vows, and I didn't take any notice of them at the time. And then I realised they're actually quite wise. He said in his vows to me that we'll always be on the same team.
Can it be used in a manipulative way though? Because I can imagine it's like, if one partner, for example, has a higher standard of cleanliness than the other, and they're like, can you please just put whatever, we're on the same team. We're both on the same team. And it's like, well, that's got nothing to do with it. That's just you want everything to be at your standard.
So sometimes he does that actually, is he goes, this household, and then he'll make some claim. And I'm like, this household never agreed that we would iron our pillowcases. Not that, but that.
Yes. And there's a link in the show notes to that episode.
Outlouders, it is almost time. Look, Holly had 2 anxiety dreams last night. She woke up screaming. And why is she waking up screaming? That is because this Thursday, friends, we are heading to Brisbane.
You don't make it sound very fun. Holly, maybe you need to be on medication.
I make it sound high stakes. I think that I make it sound like anything could happen.
It's very going to be enormously fun.
I've
nervous.
got spare anxiety medication if you need it.
This is our first Mamamia Out Loud Live presented by Nivea Cellular. If you're in Brisbane, last minute, there are a few tickets left. It is this Thursday. Please come and see us. It is going to be so fun. Holly might have a panic attack. We can't wait to see you. We have so many surprises planned. I mean, it's the best live show we've ever done. We haven't done it yet, but by far.
She says modestly.
And Mia's worked out what we're going to wear. It's going to be great. You're going to get FOMO if you don't come. Please
There are going to be outfit changes you won't be surprised to hear.
You can grab tickets at outloudlive.com.au, or there is a link in our show notes.
Thanks to Nivea Cellular.
Thank you for listening to us on Australia's #1 news and pop culture show. This episode was produced by Emeline Gazilas. The assistant producer is Tahli Blackman, and there's been audio production from Leah Porges, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Bye. Shout out to any Mamamia subscribers listening. If you love the show and want to support us as well, subscribing to Mamamia is the very best way to do so. There is a link in the episode description.